Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Shrimp Tank. I'm your co-host, Ted Jenkin, here with my co-host, Lee Heisman. We'll bring in our guest in just a second, Emily Best. And every week right here on the Shrimp Tank, as we've done for the last 8 years, we bring you some of the brightest and best CEOs, entrepreneurs, people that are starting up a business or built a mature business. And this is sort of where you get your MBA in entrepreneurship, a combination of book smarts and street smarts. And we try to teach you how to start a business, scale a business, and maybe one day exit stage left, if that's what's right for your business. You can always catch a replay of all of our great entrepreneurs. We've had people on the broadcast like Tony Horton, who founded P90X, and Hall of Fame safety Brian Dawkins, who started his business from the Philadelphia Eagles, and even the co-founder of Spanx. A lot of people don't know that Sarah Blakely actually had a co-founder, Dave Wazalewski. You ought to check out that episode. All the episodes can be found at shrimptankpodcast.com, or you can get us at Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, or on the iHeartRadio network. And we'll talk a little bit later today about what to do with our YouTube channel. But I'm excited, Lee, today because we don't always get somebody who's actually in the filmmaking business. And Atlanta has become known as kind of a film empire, but Emily Best is the founder and CEO of Atlanta-based, I'm proud to say that, Seed&Spark, which is a crowdfunding platform that makes entertainment more diverse, inclusive, connected, and essential. And she's got a really, really exciting story about her business that started in 2012 and has grown like wildfire. I think I saw recently that it was somewhere around $52 million or $52.7 million of projects, which is amazing. But before we get the podcast going, Lee, I remember during the pandemic that there was a guy, because I was doing a lot of CNN episodes on TV, and there was a guy that had a thing called Room Raider. So when we had these backgrounds on Zoom or whatever it may be, or you were on Zoom, you know, they would rate you like a 1 out of 10, a 5 out of 10. And he would basically just pick away about what he didn't like. And he was really intricate about what he said about your background. But I think, Emily, of maybe all the guests that we have had on this show, and we've done at least 500 episodes here in Atlanta, I don't know, there's something about it. I want to know, Emily, about the plants before you even talk about the business. What's the whole plant vibe going on in the background?
Hi. Hi guys. Thank you so much for having me. Everybody had like a pandemic thing that they took up, and mine was houseplants. So I think we have, I don't know, like 120 houseplants, and now they just propagate them. You know what I mean? Now they just make more houseplants. So yeah, I took up houseplants as a hobby, and it keeps the room nice and it's decorative. It's funny, they are starting to kind of encroach, aren't they? They're taking over. Yeah, I got really into houseplants. I love them. I think it's a really nice way in the morning. I live this very digital life now, and so there's something very satisfying about spending the morning just like cultivating a little bit of life and interacting with dirt and things that are real. Yeah, I find it very grounding. And my husband, bless him, he's like, really, another houseplant? He also sees how, like, when I am in houseplant watering mode, he's like, yep, live your best life. Like, I see what's happening. So yeah, it's the thing that grounds me mostly.
Well, and I'll say this, Emily. First off, I was going to ask, they're real, so watering is a part of it, which is important. I actually read an article about speaking to your plants, and if you're negative or you're angry, it actually does not help the plant grow. So there's a lot of articles about that. But Ted, speaking of movies, guys, looking at your background, I almost want to reference you as Officer Kuyan from The Usual Suspects. It feels like we could do the whole podcast off of the story. The story behind you, like The Usual Suspects, like Verbal Kint or Kaiser Sose would tell that whole movie from the background. But let's segue into that, because Atlanta is the number one, if I'm incorrect, the number one state in the entire country for TV shows. If you're out there across this country and you think California, it's actually Georgia, thanks to the Georgia film credits, the number one for TVs and movies across the country. Talk about what you do at Seed&Spark and how that even plays into the fact that you happen to be in Atlanta.
Yeah, this is really interesting, right? Because when a tax credit happens in a state, that tax credit is usually only available to like pretty large productions, right? So it's a way to attract business out of Hollywood, right? Or out of New York to come bring your projects and do the production of your projects here. What often happens in states that have really big tax credits is that they build up a bunch of industry, a sort of like working class of creators who are working for the studios, to be perfectly honest, at a bit of a discount against what they might make in one of the other states. And that's part of that's part of the attraction of the studios coming here. And what often happens is there's a gap between the investment that's happening with the film tax credits and what's actually flowing through to the independent creative community. Right. So while a lot of those independent creators are able to make a living, well, right now everybody is frozen and there are a lot of folks who are out of work. And I will say also, Georgia film workers have less financial resilience overall than they do in the other states. So the strike has hit us very, very hard. Right. But what you'll see is creators who can make a living, doing sort of their side hustle, which might be production design or craft services or PA work or things like that, when actually what they want to do is write and direct, right? And so there's a bit of a gap between what gets invested sort of from Hollywood that for many years until really recently, they were also bringing in all of the, we'll call it above the line or the headlining talent that was really making the big money, right? The writers and the directors were all either based in Hollywood and flying out here. And now over the last couple of years, we've finally seen the studios actually starting to move their operations here, host their writers' rooms here. There's a lot more, we'll say, upward mobility in the creative community here. Like you don't have to just like hit a ceiling in Georgia and then go to LA. It's like you might actually be able to tier up. However, there's all these independent creators who what they really want to be doing is writing and directing. And so they're getting all this practice, this incredible practice, thanks to the Hollywood industry, but they still need to find funding for their own projects. And the tax credits do not help them with that, unfortunately. Like it doesn't trickle down to the independent creator on the ground. And so Seed&Spark really is part of what fills that infrastructure gap for creators. But it's better for creators than if this were a grant program, et cetera, because at the end of crowdfunding, what creators have is a direct connection with an audience that they can utilize, monetize, and grow for the rest of their careers. So at Seed&Spark, we really see ourselves as an accelerant to the cultural impact of creativity, because we make it possible for creators from anywhere to build and grow independent careers, keep their own independent voices, become the people in their communities that then bring the next generation up, right? I feel like we're kind of like a critical infrastructure gap in some ways,
right?
But that's much more focused on the impact of creativity than just the sheer production of it.
Emily, I would love to be able to just describe to people, because we get a lot of entrepreneurs, obviously, that listen to the podcast around, just what is crowdfunding. And then I'm curious about the legalities of starting a crowdfunding business. Were there licenses or regulatory hoops that you had to jump through to basically get this structure model set up? Because it is a unique model as a business model. And I'm curious about both sides of that.
It's so funny. When I started, I thought of us so much as a film company, and people would be like, well, you're fintech. And I'm like, what? And I don't know if we were just named one of the top 200 fintech companies in the world.
Wow.
Which I still was like, we're fintech? Like, I guess we are, right? But we live in a pretty special category of fintech, which is rewards-based crowdfunding. And rewards-based crowdfunding, because it's not selling a security of any kind. It's really just like an exchange of value, a donation or a contribution, depending on how the campaign is set up. We actually live pretty far outside a lot of some of the harshest like fintech regulations. Like we're not regulated like an equity-based crowdfunding platform might be, right? There's Reg D. There's a lot of regulation where you actually have to become registered. Rewards-based crowdfunding platforms don't have those. We have a lot of tax implications, right, that we have to consider based on what sort of thing is funding on the platform. But the cool thing is like it's really kind of a sales enablement tool more than anything. So it again, it's always why when they say fintech, I'm like, I mean, okay, kind of. But we also like
Emily, do you anticipate when they say that, do you anticipate that now where you are, which is amazing, in a top 200 fintech company in the world, that you'll see those kind of multiples on the business one day, that wherever the revenues are, that you would be at a 10 to 20 like a SaaS model, or you don't think it'll look like that?
No, that's why we built a SaaS model on the other side of the business, which I can talk about in a little bit. No, yeah. I mean, so it's interesting because I think the rewards-based crowdfunding market is at a bit of a turning point. So Kickstarter and Indiegogo sort of arose out of the ashes of the 2007-2008 financial crisis as an answer for artists who no longer had like a rich uncle who had money to spare, right? Like it was like everybody got a haircut in the stock market, and all of a sudden artists were having to find these alternative paths for fundraising.
Right.
And so it was this really incredible time of enablement where social media was brand new, right? Like all these technologies, you think about like 2007, 2008, like we were barely Facebooking. We were not really Instagramming, right. Like Twitter was brand new. Everything was still on the open social graph. So it was this incredible moment of possibility. And it was very much a sort of creator enablement platform. Like it was not built, crowdfunding as an industry, rewards-based crowdfunding was not built with a fintech mentality. It was built as like a marketplace mentality where we take a small cut of transactions. So the revenues in crowdfunding were capped by some early decisions made by platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo that like, we just take 5% of revenue and like, that's the business model. And that was the business model that was in place for a decade.
Walk us through one of the movies on here. Like I saw one of the movies that was on the website, which sounded like a cool title, was 98 Honda, because I think I had one of those. And so how does that work exactly? Does the average person who wants a crowdfund put in how much, and then you set a raise amount? Is that, the filmmaker says we need 50 grand or 100 grand to get this thing off the ground, and then how does that work exactly?
Yeah, I have a 2-hour answer to that question, which is, at a very high level, a creator usually makes a budget for their film. They figure out what portion of that they want to crowdfund, usually based on how much audience they've already developed, how much they think they can really like leverage their community for. And then they go through a onboarding process. They put in all of their details. And what's unique to Seed&Spark is we have actual crowdfunding experts review that campaign and make sure they're set up for success. And then we'll send feedback. We'll be like, here's what we would do to the pitch video. I think you should tighten up your outreach strategy. And if you're going to try to raise over $25,000, we will review your outreach strategy to make sure that like you can actually get there. And that's why we have the highest crowdfunding campaign success rate in the world. That's really what sets us apart.
It's a brutally tough business, though, isn't it, to make money? I only say that because I've done a lot of good personal investments, but the worst one I think I ever made is that I put money into the trilogy of the Dorothy of Oz. So Dorothy of Oz was made, the movie. Disney made like the Wizard or the Great Oz and Powerful or something like that, and then Dorothy of Oz was an animated 3D movie. It had Jim Belushi and Lea Michele. But I learned very quickly in there that they way underestimated the P&A dollars, or I guess as they call it, the print and advertising dollars. And they basically whiffed. And so it basically, the undertow of the current took it under very quickly. It's a really hard business to make money, right?
Yes. Well, this is what's beautiful about rewards-based crowdfunding is it decouples the financial success of the film from the success of the crowdfunding campaign. A crowdfunding campaign says to the audience, help us make sure this gets made. It does not say, and then participate in the upside. It says, help us. And we're going to, just through the process of crowdfunding and the process of making the film, we're going to make this such a rewarding experience for you as the audience that you're going to bring all your friends to the movies when you see it, and you're going to be like, this was my movie. That's the genius of crowdfunding. This is why I generally say to most creators, do not do equity crowdfunding for your campaigns, because the film business has a less than 2% profitability rate on, I'm sorry, in the independent film space, fewer than 2% of films even make their money back.
Wow.
Right. And what you're seeing, the reason there's strikes is a catastrophic failure in the Hollywood business models. The models are coming apart at the seams. Vertical integration turns out was not good for Hollywood. It wasn't pre-trust busting. It isn't post-trust busting, post the repeal of the Paramount consent decrees. So creators have to create. Right? They're endlessly resourceful. And crowdfunding is one of those tools that allows them to create a little bit outside of the pressure of creating a financial return. The pressure of creating a financial return is somewhat alleviated, actually, when you're building an audience already for your work who's excited to see it.
So first off, let me share, guys. Emily, we could have you on the show for 2 hours. I already can tell. And that's meant in a positive way, because the questions and understanding this, the population of 330 million people in America know movies from a viewer perspective, not from the underworkings behind it and how to make that happen. So I have to ask this very low-hanging fruit. I know our audience is wanting to know this question. I do want to go back a little about your history, but first and foremost, look at the way the film industry's changed, right? We grew up, or at least Ted and I in our early 50s here have grown up going to the theater, paying our 10, 15, whatever it continued to go up to, paying for your food, your popcorn. These days, it's funny, Emily, I'll share this. Ted and I will reference movies from years ago, Eddie Murphy era, things of that nature. And we know every line from every movie. And everybody says, how do you know those lines? How are you guys so smart? I said, no, there were just about 5 movies made per year. It wasn't that we were smart. There were only 5 or 10 movies. So you had a very small segment of what to watch, where these days there's 17 different streaming services with different ways. People are producing movies on Netflix. How has the industry changed with the streaming service, and how does it affect you and the producers when they make a movie? Are they making movies now and making their money in the theater? Is it now through streaming services? How has that changed for you?
I mean, they're not making a lot of money. What happened with streamers is, you were in the early days of the streamers, they were buying films after they were made, paying like 7 to 10 year licenses, right? And that was kind of good for creators for a little while, right? So they became buyers at film festivals, which was really interesting. However, it used to be that when you sold the rights to your film, you would sell your rights across multiple windows of distribution. That first window would be theatrical, right? And then you would do television, then you would do VHS, DVD, so that order could change. Then you might do all the like non-theatrical, the cruise ships and airplanes and stuff like that. And then international foreign sales. What happened is the streamers collapsed all of those rights into one deal, all rights, all territories, much less money, right? So you used to be able to exploit the rights of, if you had a good film, right? You could exploit the rights globally for quite some time. And like big international films had like a 10-year negative IRR. Like it would take them 10 years to actually finally really make their money back and really start turning a profit, which is wild to think about. But these days, it's like it all got collapsed. And if you're making smaller films, the ability to exploit those multiple windows was really important to more substantial remuneration. And as we well know, like you don't get residuals really from streaming platforms. So when I say vertical integration was really bad for the film business, I really mean it was really bad for the film business. We used to have this incredibly diverse, we had really diverse revenue streams, right? And it collapsed it to literally a single revenue stream. And so I think that's the thing that creators are facing. And it's why I think it has driven so much creative entrepreneurship over the last 5 to 10 years.
You know, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the SaaS model that you were mentioning and like how the business works. And I also, on Lee's comment, you know, what's interesting about being able to quote movies, I think a lot of the young people can't quote movies anymore because most of these movies are special effects and they're crash bang smash 'em up movies, anywhere from like the Fast and Furious 11 to even the Marvel movies, where the dialogue that was written in movies like The Breakfast Club and just classic movies, there was a lot of dialogue. So I want to hear the SaaS model, but is this, are you seeing amongst like creators that they're actually starting to write dialogue again? Because I feel like, we need some of that back in the movie business.
Yeah, I mean, those films never went away, but their budget's dramatic. So in the 80s and the 90s, until like the mid 90s, there were a tremendous amount of like 40 to 80 million dollar rom-coms, right?
Yeah.
That Meryl Streep would be in. Like you would see these like really big Hollywood rom-coms, the like You've Got Mail, right? That everything Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks every day. Like all those kinds of movies used to be in really regular play. But as the film industry increasingly needed to internationalize, and I mean, what really started happening is like Hollywood started making movies for Chinese megaplexes, right?
Wow.
And so you needed stuff that had a bit of like culture washing. And that's what superhero movies generally, I mean, honestly, they are like bastions of American exceptionalism and like warmongering, if you ask me. But for the most part, like it's culture washing. It's so that it works as well in a 4D Chinese megaplex as it does in theaters here, because like that's where the money is, right? And so you saw a movement away from that like really beautiful, like not Oscar worthy, but like everybody wanted to go see that latest like rom-com or dramedy that was in the theater, and a move towards these like these industrial franchises because of the globalization of the film market. And yeah, I wish I could say it was like, oh no, it was like a creative blip. No, it was a business decision. What I think we are seeing is a resurgence in interest in some of the independent films, because I think people are tired of seeing the same characters over and over again. And there is still a ticket purchasing group of people who are like, I'm like too far away from what happened in the beginning of the Marvel universe to be able to understand what is happening now, for example. And like, I'm happy to send my kids. And, I think there's some incredible things being made. I think Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And I think the challenge is that in order to do theatrical releasing, I don't know if you know this, but like big companies buy up theatrical releasing space. So I believe in the US, Disney owns roughly 80 to 90% of all of the theatrical releasing space for the next decade in this country.
Wow.
So they sort of pre-buy the theatrical space. And then if you're like, wait, I don't want to show that movie, Disney's like, okay, then you won't get any of our movies. And that's like a bunch of revenue that you miss out on. So there's a lot of levers in the business that need to be reset. And we are missing a lot of the regulation that we used to have that would allow for more diverse content to make it into your movie theaters. That's for sure.
Now, Emily, I see little ones behind you, and I'm not sure what their age is today, but Ted doesn't have little ones, and my 10-year-old and older daughters, you spoke of Spider-Man. Ted's not even familiar with the new Into the Multiverse one. These movies, Ted, the different type of animation, it's literally like an orchestra. It's a beautiful symphony from beginning to end, and the soundtrack and the audio of those movies, how they incorporate it all. I'm blown away, Emily. I agree with you on that movie. The most recent one and even the first one, how they kind of synced it all together and made it literally from beginning to end a visceral movie for what was a cartoon effectively.
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, that's thanks to the diversification of Hollywood. There's a lot of people out here being real mad about diversity things. That is a movie directed by a Black director who it also incorporated the work of a 14-year-old super fan. So there's a Lego sequence. I'm not going to ruin anything about it, but there is a Lego sequence inside this new Spider-Verse movie they found this kid who was like making these Lego sequences, and they invited him to make a sequence for the friggin' Spider-Verse. Can you imagine if you're
That's
14-year-old
cool.
fan?
Spectacular.
And like, that is the opportunity of what we're doing, of the world that we live in now, that like people can learn to do things on the internet, then they can post them on the internet and they can be discovered. Like that level of discovery is a real advantage of this time, but it has its downsides, right? Which is like the scale at which you need to be able to make a film in order to really make money back.
Very true. Well, as we get closer to the end here, guys, and we could spend hours with you, no question. You talked a little about the SaaS model, right?
Mm-hmm.
Software as a service model, and as your business is growing, can you speak to that as well? Because we get into the movie part, which is amazing, but just kind of, we want to wrap up a little on the business piece. Talk about your SaaS model.
Yeah. So, in about 2018, about 6 years after we launched, our creators came to us as the entertainment business was verticalizing. And they said, we have a new problem, right? So now we're really good at getting our films made. But now, no matter how successful we are, we're marketed on social media and streamed on streaming platforms and delivered via algorithm directly to people who already look like us and already think like us. And that's not why we make work. We make work to change people's minds and challenge their worldview and open their hearts and minds. And we realized we were going to have to get out of the film business. But like, I ask you, if somebody came to you and said, how do you deliver films to audiences at scale who don't identify as the audience for this work without using social media or streaming? How might you go about that? Well, I desperately went to all my advisors and I was like, what would you do? And one of them said, did you know the workplace is the most diverse place most people are in their lives? If you could find a place for story in the workplace, you might really have something. So we did a bunch of research, and the first thing we discovered will surprise absolutely no one, and that is that nobody likes corporate training videos or believes they're particularly effective. And the second is that workplaces were undergoing the largest transition in workforce history. There are more generations working side by side. There are more different styles of working happening under the same roof than ever before. It is more globalization. It is more volatility, right? You need deeply resilient organizations that can distribute power to the very edges. It is a totally new style of management and leadership. It requires totally different tools for engagement, resilience, equity, and inclusion. And we believe that actually the stable of content that had already been building in our network could potentially be the solution. And we connected the incredible short cinema coming out of our networks with a bunch of neuroscience research and pedagogy. And we built a SaaS platform that replaces like boring, crappy corporate training videos with experiential learning built around the world's best short cinema. Academy Award-winning cinema, BAFTA award-winning cinema from all over the world. That, can you imagine if you're like, oh, I have to do my like leadership training, and then you logged on and watched a movie that blew your mind? That's what we're offering now. And that business reached a little over $1 million in ARR in its first 16 months.
Wow.
We're working now with clients like Wells Fargo and Sony, the Guggenheim Museum. We just signed with the Woodruff here in Atlanta.
Yeah, great organization.
And there's a few other Atlanta companies that we're in contract with now. So yeah, that part's really exciting to me because, short films don't have a monetization opportunity, really. There are very, very, very limited opportunities to monetize short films. There's like streamers don't stream them. But creators make them anyway. They make them because they have to tell the stories. They make them because that's how much money they can raise. They make them for all sorts of reasons. And the ways in which short films are just unobstructed by any sort of producerial overlords makes them a really pure opportunity to build educational content around them, because they're just very real, right? And so now we're sending thousands of dollars every quarter to these creators who otherwise would have made nothing on these films, and it's absolutely thrilling. That platform is called Film Forward.
It's such cool stuff, and I mean, and so exciting that you're here in Atlanta, and boy, we have to connect up, both Lee and I, with you offline. We have so many contacts here in Atlanta to help, your cause and what you're doing in the business, which is pretty amazing. For folks that are watching this today that are either creators, filmmakers, or people that might want to crowdfund one of these creators or filmmakers, How do they get in touch with you? What's the best way for somebody to get started?
Yeah, we are at Seed&Spark on all of the platforms. But what I would do is I would start by going to Seed&Spark's YouTube channel and going through our crowdfunding to build independence workshop. Or you can go to our events page, seedandspark.com/events, and see where we're teaching that. I'm going to be teaching it 3 separate times in Tennessee, Knoxville, Nashville, and Memphis here coming up this fall. That workshop is really the fundamentals of creative entrepreneurship, but it is how to leverage a crowdfunding campaign to really kick off or support an independent, sustainable film career. And it's the reason that our creators are so successful. So if I were going to say, where do you start? Start by taking that class, please, because it's going to make the process of crowdfunding so much easier, maybe even kind of enjoyable. And that's really where we're finding our creators root their success.
Well, thank you so much, not only for being a fellow entrepreneur, but for being a disruptor, for allowing more people to have an opportunity to share their voice and grow their own businesses. I mean, all that is exciting stuff. And I really love the business model. And as that SaaS model grows, I think maybe you will get that 10 or 20x one day on those numbers. It'd be pretty cool stuff. So we appreciate you spending some time with us today in the Shrimp Tank. We definitely want to have you on the national TV show, The Roadmap. I think it would be great for people across the country to hear your story and what you're doing in this business that you're growing. And of course, Lee and I love that it's in our backyard here in Atlanta. That's even better. So thank you so much for being on this episode of the Shrimp Tank.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond.